Hello, everybody. Lisa Pierce here, Executive Editor of Packaging Digest. Welcome to our session, Cannabis Branding, How Packaging Wins Higher Sales. Today, I have the pleasure of talking with cannabis expert Elizabeth Corbett, Vice President of Sales with AE Global. The company is a cannabis packaging provider with end-to-end solutions, including an in-house packaging design lab. Beth has more than 20 years of experience in the packaging industry and about 8 years of involvement now on the cannabis side. Beth, hi, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Wonderful. Cannabis manufacturers, as we know, have had several packaging challenges these days, also known as opportunities. So let's walk through a couple of these to explain what the situation is and offer some solutions or recommendations where we can. Do cannabis companies, Beth, understand the value of packaging design on their business? Is it top of mind for them?
Just like any other industry, I would say some yes, some no. So I think it depends. I think that in markets where it's more challenging and more mature markets, such as California, Oregon, Washington, Colorado, even Nevada, in those markets that are more mature, behaves more like a typical retail consumer product environment, absolutely. And your packaging really talks to your brand and your audience. And in some markets where it'll be interesting to see in places like, let's say, New Jersey or New York when they first come out, and or even Illinois when it first came on, is that in those markets, it's all about there isn't enough cannabis to service the market when they go legal. So in that case, somebody might go to the dispensary and they literally will take whatever they can get. Mm-hmm. So in that markets, I think it's something that you see evolve.
Okay, wonderful. And I would imagine it also depends too on whether it's for recreation or medicinal. Is that what you're seeing? You said that you saw it more on the retail side of things, correct?
Right. So in those states where it's medical only, it tends to look like medicine. So, and has very stringent requirements. So for example, in the state of Florida, you're really limited in terms of what you can put on the package, primary or secondary. All primary packaging has to be white, definitely has a very medical feel. Same with states like Pennsylvania and Ohio. And folks try to incorporate their brand. You definitely want to differentiate your product. What's interesting, all three of those states have a very large and healthy medical market. But yes, lots of limitations.
Okay. Well, when they are able to, how are the cannabis manufacturers differentiating their brands through packaging?
There's lots of different options. It really depends. So in some cases, you see folks coming up with really creative structures. So everything from, I think of brands like Dosist in California, who have come up with a very elegant, premium experience that definitely stands out on shelf. Same thing can be done with a tin. In terms of how they can differentiate yourselves, some of it's just structure. So you see everything from, rigid boxes to really elegant paperboard, folding carton experiences, tins. In the case of pouches, which is still very important in this market, it can just be a really upscaled pouch experience. Sometimes they can do it by being really focused on sustainability and making sure that all of their packaging really meets maybe their own internal or external sustainability goals. There are so many different ways that you can differentiate yourself on shelf.
Okay, wonderful. And when they're doing that, when they're making their packaging selection, is customer stock packaging more prevalent? And are you seeing any kind of a change in that, any kind of a shift in it?
It depends on the item. So if it's a rigid package, let's say a child-resistant tube, a child-resistant jar, I'm seeing a lot of folks veering toward a stock item, just because it gives them a little bit more flexibility. Anything else, overall, I see folks really trying to be as custom as possible, again, to be able to stand out on shelf. Whether it be, in our case, we have a child-resistant folding carton called Easy Lock that is terrific for things like cartridges or vape pens, and it's fully customizable. You see that with labels. Now, if you're a large company doing really large volumes, you do have a lot more flexibility in terms of doing custom things. You can do a custom dosing mechanism like Select Squeeze, which is something that we developed for Curaleaf. You can do custom flower jars, but in that case, you've got a lot more wherewithal, right? You can create something that you can bring over and container load from China. You've got deeper pockets to be able to manage that. There are a lot of folks who don't have that kind of funding or even that kind of timeline to do that.
Or maybe not that much skill in-house from a packaging point of view, though, right? Maybe is that an issue as well? Could it be?
It could be. Hopefully, those folks are working with people like us,
Okay.
who are the ones who have the skill in-house. As a brand owner, I would want, if I were ever looking at doing something like that, I would really want to make sure that I'm partnering with a supplier who really understands the market, who understands all the timelines that are involved to develop something, who really has the skill set to do that and to help you manage the whole supply chain.
Okay. So at the interaction with the customer at the dispensaries, how can these cannabis companies use packaging to maybe get the space? I know in a retail store where things are positioned on the shelves is very important. How can cannabis companies use packaging to try to get this, number one, space in the dispensaries, and then the best space in dispensaries?
So a couple things. I think it's really smart to talk to your dispensaries where you're going to be carrying your product. What are the things that are important to them? For example, do they want the flexibility if you have pouches or cartons to have a hang hole to give them the flexibility? Is it, when you're thinking about how that carton is going to be laid out, making sure that your packaging is right sized. Nobody wants something that's oversized basis what it is. I recently worked with a company where we helped them downsize their gummy box by, I want to say maybe 40.
What kind of box?
Gummy box for gummies.
Okay.
Sorry. And in that case, we helped them reduce it by about 40% because there were dispensaries in California who didn't want to carry the product because it was oversized for what the product is. So, and that's a sustainability thing as well. I think that, is there something about in your package? Can you provide some sort of educational element for the customer to talk about what the desired effect is of that particular product? Is it something to help you relax? Is it something to help you with anxiety, to help you sleep, to give you energy, whatever that may be? And I'll be the first one to say as a consumer that there are products that I have tried for the first time solely based on the package. It actually is much like wine.
Oh, yes.
Like 70% of wine is tried the first time in this out of the store because of the label, because of the shape of the bottle. Now, it's up to the product to be good to make you want to rebuy it. And I would say the same thing applies to cannabis, absolutely in a retail environment.
One of the things that I've noticed in the dispensaries that I've gone into is that the layout is nothing standard. Where if you're selling into a store like Walmart, their cereal aisle is very regimented, very standardized. How can, you mentioned earlier, know the dispensaries where you're going to be selling your product. But once you get to be a large company or a multi-state manufacturer, I can see how that can get unruly, if that's the right word to use. So how can cannabis manufacturers know the ins and outs of the height of a shelf, dispensary by dispensary? Isn't that asking a little too much of them?
No, I don't think so, because each cannabis brand will either have their own sales force within a state, or they're working with a distributor. Pretty common in states like California, where you have a distributor who's selling and promoting your product. So you should be able to work with them to give that feedback. I think in any retailer, take outside of cannabis, every retailer has different items. So if I'm a company and I'm selling into the vitamin shop, they're going to have completely different regulations about what can be on shelf versus, let's say, going into Sephora. And believe it or not, there are CBD brands who are selling into both.
Okay.
Right. So I think as a brand owner, that's part of your responsibility. But you brought up something. You're right. Every dispensary is different. And it's part of the reason to try to think about, how do I design my brand, whether it be with a color scheme, whether it be with overall branding, whether it be the shape of a carton. How do I do something that's going to make that stand out? So for example, for those who don't know,
Ooh, very nice. I love examples.
So this is there's a brand called Wild. They make gummies, which by the way are fabulous gummies. But one of the things about this carton, which is it's kind of a hexagon shape, it's very distinctive on shelf. So if you're in Santa Rosa, you're actually able to have product everywhere. It's totally bizarre. You can walk into a dispensary and they have open tables and they're very well laid out, but you can actually pick up and touch product. I mean, not actual product, but the boxes, right? In most markets, it's up behind a shelf, it's behind glass. But if I see this carton, I know this carton, right? So I can walk into a dispensary and I'll be like, oh, they have Wild, right? I'll know what that is. So every brand has that option. Another one I think that's done a good job of standing out, Holistic Industries has the Jerry Garcia brand, right? Very, very distinctive. Now, this is a simple carton, but if I see this on a shelf, I'm going to go, oh yeah, that's the Garcia brand. Okay. So it can be done in a simple, carton, like a traditional carton. It can be done in a really creative shape. It can also be done in a creative shape of the actual primary package as well. So there are ways that you can stand out, or you can make your pouch look amazing. There are things that you can do from a printing perspective, just like anything else, where you can make your pouch totally stand out, whether it be through the graphics, spot gloss. It's just like a folding carton. You have a way to make it stand out.
Okay, excellent. When I was thinking about the standardization or lack thereof, also thought that the state-by-state regulations are changing so rapidly. And, this is one of the challenges that I know the cannabis industry faces more so than any other market that's out there. And that because of the changes on the regulatory side, it often requires very significant changes to the packaging to reflect that. And this even goes beyond only just labeling and graphics updates. Beth, can you explain just a little bit more what this situation is, what's going on here?
The unfortunate part is every state makes their own rules. And that is an unfortunate part of the industry right now. And that comes from the fact that we're not federally regulated. And as a result, in the state of Michigan, they have recently ruled that you cannot have fruit on any edibles packaging. And in the state of Washington, you can't use bright colors, but in California, you can put anything you want. Or in Illinois, you can't show products, so no flour, no nothing can be shown, but in California, you can. That's very challenging. As a packaging, designer, part of what we try to do is work with our end customers to try to design something that works in as many states as possible. So, and it may be that you design a structure that works in all of those states, but in some states, it has to be labeled differently, or you have to put a sleeve over it so that you can't see the product, or a label over it. So that's part of what we can design. In some cases, I'm trying to find a box. This is a good example. In some cases, we've designed a box that's maybe a little larger than what you had originally wanted for the product. Maybe it's just for a tube, but the back is large enough that you can label it in maybe 4 states. So I created a box that can now be used across 4 states. You're going to hit much larger volumes. We can inventory the product because the product cannot cross state lines, but the packaging can. So there are ways that you can design the package so that it can be used in as many states as possible. You're always going to have ones that it doesn't work, but if you're in 10 states and I can come up with 3 solutions for 10 states, that's a win, right?
It's definite win.
Everybody wins from that perspective.
Yep. Yep. Awesome. Are you seeing any other trends happening as new states start legalizing cannabis?
Oh, trying to think. I think not as much standardization as I would hope. And I think that will come. Part of that even comes from dosing. Like in some states, you can only have 10 milligrams in a package total. In some states, you can have 100. In some states, if you have 100, the individual dosing has to be there, like, 10 individual 10 milligram packets within it. Some states don't have that requirement. Overall, one of the interesting trends I'm seeing is the expansion of edibles and, in particular, beverages. That's definitely on the horizon.
Okay.
I think that we will see. I know we personally are working on some pretty interesting packaging for the edibles market and beverages in particular, whether that be for beverage dosing, which we have a brand new item coming out for, or figuring out how to make sleek cans, which are what everybody wants to have when they have let's say a 5 or 10 milligram beverage, have a child resistant cap that's not elderly resistant, as I like to say.
Yep. Senior friendly.
Senior friendly. So I think that's something that I see that definitely is interesting. Overall, one of the biggest trends is just trying to be sustainable, finding the most sustainable packaging possible, whether that's using paperboard that's recycled or recyclable, or using cans, or using recycled plastic, or in the case of pouches, ones that are compostable or recycled or recyclable. I think overall the industry understands that we contribute a lot of garbage because of the fact that things have to be child resistant. So I'm finding that that's always one of the big questions. And then I'd say the other interesting trend that just is it's a natural byproduct of the pandemic is moving as much production of as possible of packaging to domestic, to North America.
Okay.
And that's for a lot of different reasons.
Supply mostly. Is cost a factor too?
It is. So
Okay.
So it's everything from, you used to be able to get a container from China to the US for about $3,000, and that same container can now cost $24,000. That's a hard cost that gets spread across all the goods that are in that container. The other thing is, you used to be able to get a container in 3 to 4 weeks, and now it's 12 weeks plus. So if I'm waiting on let's say I was able to get something for cheap, but I can't get it, and I'm not able to have my product on the shelf, that's no savings is worth that. So that's an overall trend in the industry, and it's one of the first questions that people ask me when we're developing something new is, I want to be sustainable, and is there any way we can make sure it's domestic?
Okay, wonderful. I would imagine, though, that as we were talking about, the regulatory changes causing some packaging changes to be needed, that from a sustainability point of view, that might generate a lot of waste, where you might have packages that you can no longer use. Are you seeing that as well? And are there any other packaging technologies or processes that can maybe help manage all those regulatory changes that are needed to be reflected on the package?
Two things that I would say from a guidance perspective is, one, if you are a cannabis brand owner, is to make sure that you have good open dialogue with your state. Because what we find is, in states where you have really good open dialogue when they are going to make a change, is to help make sure that they understand that maybe you have 6 months worth of inventory right on the floor, and not do a light switch move. So all of a sudden you're unfortunately having to throw all that away, because that's a waste in so many ways, right?
Oh, so many.
So that's the first level of guidance. The second thing is, overall, we work with our customers to recommend that they not usually have more than 3 to 4 months worth of inventory on the floor, just because it's too high a risk. Now, the good news is that it's not as volatile as it used to be. People have learned a lot. but every once in a while we do have a move that surprises us coming from state regulators. So if you make sure that you have, let's say, 3 to 4 months worth of inventory on the floor, it really does reduce your risk. And the last thing is you can also, I mentioned designing a package where you're making it fit different states' needs with labeling on the back. That can also reduce some of your risk. So if you're making your box be really more about the brand and not a lot of too specific information, that's something that you can deal with labeling as well. Because if it's only a change that's, let's say, a couple of sentences in, let's say, your batch data label, that's something that can easily be accomplished with labeling, and that doesn't cost very much money.
Okay, maybe in addition to labeling, what about online digital printing? Is that something that you're seeing some manufacturers look at?
For labels, not direct on cartons. It's been something
Okay, still labeling.
It's still labeling. We've had a
Okay.
lot of, I actually know a lot of folks who've tried to do some experimentation printing directly on cartons. And right now, it seems that labeling tends to be the easier way to go.
Okay, got it. We'll see going forward if they're able to maybe reduce that extra step, because you print the label and then you have to apply it. So that's an extra step on the line as well.
It is. There's a couple things to consider. One is on batch data, they don't normally have that information until that day, right? So they're packing out that day. So from that perspective, I think that that's a challenge. The other thing is, I think you'll see a lot of interesting investment once we're able to go interstate. Because once you have interstate commerce and you can consolidate, it's going to take a lot of these pain points away.
Okay, Beth, what do you think is the possibility that that's going to happen?
I opened the door.
Okay, sorry, I couldn't resist.
I don't know. I know we've talked about this. I have high faith that something in safe banking will pass. I used to think this year, I don't know, but I think that that's the thing that has the highest factor of passing. And that's going to help a lot of things. That's going to help investment. It's going to eliminate the need to have the cash industry, which honestly is not safe for a lot of people. It's also going to allow, we are an industry with taxation without representation. So the IRS takes all they want, but you can't write anything off. You can't write off equipment investment. You can't write anything off. Yeah. And so as an industry, I think it would legitimize it. There's also some talk that if you go to safe banking, there's also some opportunities to do interstate commerce with states that are legal that are next to each other. So like a California, okay. I mean, when you think about the whole West other than Idaho, basically, because even Utah has medical. Mm-hmm. So I think that is, what's interesting is, once New York and New Jersey go legal, 75% of the United States will have access to legal cannabis. That's amazing, right?
It happened so quickly, at least from my perspective.
It did. I mean, Washington and Colorado were the first ones to pass about 9 years ago.
Yeah.
It happened very quickly.
Very quickly. And just to explain a little bit, Beth has said safe banking a couple of times. And what that is that's the Secure and Fair Enforcement Banking Act. So that's where you get the SAFE, Secure and Fair Enforcement Banking Act. And that's something that's been in the works for a while now, but I don't think it's been sent for a vote either the Senate or the House. Sorry, and it would be a huge benefit for cannabis manufacturers just because of all the regulation that they have right now and the limits, the very strict limits that they have from a money point of view. Mm-hmm. Okay. As if we haven't talked about enough challenges, I do believe that there's one other challenge, well, two other challenges that I want to talk about, and then we'll wrap things up here. And one of them is the fact that a lot of cannabis companies, especially the larger ones now, have a wide portfolio of products. And it could be still in flower, it could be in edibles, but the products, even within those particular areas, flowers or edibles, often are categorized themselves by different tiers. So for example, they might have a premium brand and then, like a value brand, which is typical for any, other retail product that you're seeing and buying in the store. How does packaging, how are they using packaging to help them position those their brands within those tiers?
Yeah, so from a tier perspective, we're seeing the fastest growing segment in the cannabis segment to be what I would refer to as more of your everyday tier, right? Your everyday, I hate the word economical, so I'm going to use the word everyday.
Okay.
And when you're thinking about everyday, you're going to think about from a packaging design, what's going to fit my budget, right? Because obviously that's a big part of it. You might have a much lower budget per SKU. Sometimes that's made up for the fact that you might be doing larger volumes. So you may be able to do a little nicer package than you would have thought of just because those tend to be running in much larger volumes. Then you have what I would consider, like you said, more of your, let's say, premium, and then almost what you would consider like reserve limited edition. And we are definitely seeing some of that reserve limited edition, which is pretty fun. And those tend to be a much higher end package, right? Something that definitely has a very premium feel. You see that with devices, right? Absolutely, with devices, some with high end vape pens, and then
Definitely a higher price point for the product.
absolutely higher price
Okay.
point. So those are all things. Whenever we're sitting down with somebody to work on new packaging, one of the first things I ask is, do you have a target cost of goods? Do you have your target COGS, and do you know where packaging fits in that? Because that really helps me figure out, are you going to be doing a pouch, which is, you're probably least expensive oftentimes? Is it something where you'd like to at least get into a child resistant folding carton? What is your brand saying? And so, and you already mentioned this. I actually think one of the most fun things about cannabis is the wide variety of products to package. And I think one of the biggest challenges is, how do you make it all look like it came from the same company, right?
Ah,
So,
family look. Yes.
so you might have a brand of, I'll use Cresco as a really good example. Cresco
Okay.
has multiple products, multiple families. And so you might have the high supply family. You've got the Cresco, you've got Mindy's. You've got, I think they have 6 different brand families. Now, they all definitely stand apart on their own, but if you put them all together, they're very complementary and they do look like they came from the same company. That is challenging. I think of the only industry that I can think of that's anything like that is cosmetics. Cosmetics is probably the only industry that I can think of that has that many different kinds of products. What are you going to do for your primary package? Um, I'll give you a good example of how what I would say an everyday versus maybe a premium. So an everyday might go in just a child resistant tube with a label on it, and maybe next step up may be child resistant tube inside a really nice folding carton, and maybe one step up from that might be a much more elegant experience, maybe a tin, maybe a higher end folding carton. So all of those are achieving what they need to achieve, but it's all really going to be also driven by your target cost of goods.
Okay, so that's quite a lot, and I would imagine that it's like a lot of the other markets where your volume, well, maybe not. Is the volume where it's the best opportunity for good margin? I guess what I'm trying to think of is if they're going to be selling everyday products and have a price point for packaging, just from an investment point of view, if they want to spend a little bit more on packaging and lower their margin if the volume is there. Those are all business decisions that I guess would depend company to company and probably brand to brand.
It would. I think it also depends on the item. There are certain items within cannabis that are known for being more competitive and lower margin. So,
Okay.
for example, pre-rolls. pre-rolls tend to be, and you can have, it doesn't mean you can't have a premium pre-roll. You can have a high-end pre-roll, but pre-rolls would be an example of something where it tends to be pretty competitive.
Okay.
And that's something that you have to keep in mind when you're designing the packages. How do I design something that still really represents your brand, looks great on shelf, but is meeting your target cost?
Okay, great. All right, thank you for that. And I want to wrap up with one of the challenges that I have to be honest with you, Beth, of all the people that I've talked with who are in the cannabis market, this is the one that they're almost always bringing it up to me first. And that's the whole idea of child resistance. And we know that it's a must. It's a requirement for cannabis packaging. What's going on here, and what are some of the more creative solutions that you might know about that you can share with us from, packaging in different sizes and shapes and different materials? I know it's a lot to ask.
It is. There's a lot there. Um, I I think long term, if I had a globe in front of me and I could figure everything out, um, I think it's pretty interesting what Michigan's doing, where they're saying that flower products, so inhalables, do not have to be in child-resistant packaging, and that edibles have to be. And I think that that's actually really smart, because I'm hoping that no child is gonna grab a pouch and start eating an ounce of weed. I don't even know what that would do to them. Um, sorry, but I can't imagine that happening. Edibles, I think, is incredibly important to be in child-resistant packaging, right? Beverages, all of
Right.
that, I think, are very important. So, if I had a crystal ball, I'd be very interested to see what the industry as a whole starts to do to think about that. From a child-resistant perspective, I think we're all trying to figure out how to have a pleasing experience that still accomplishes what it's supposed to do. I know in our case, we have something called Easy Lock, which is just a button. It's a button. The button's actually plastic. It's actually reground plastic, so it's recycled.
Okay.
And you open it up. It's designed to be a one-handed move, so it's
Um,
easy to do.
could you do that one-handed, maybe in the middle of the screen?
Is that show? I'm sorry. I'm not.
Hang on just a second. Let
There we
me
go.
see if I can.
See?
Okay. Yeah.
You see that? Sorry, it's hard because I'm at an angle. But then you can push that open, and then there's your tray. There's your tray.
Okay.
Um, but that's designed to be one-handed. There's actually a vape pen that I bought in Northern California that I refused to ever buy again, even though it was actually a great vape pen, because I could never reopen the packaging, and I kept having my husband have to open it for me. So you're right. It's incredibly challenging. We've all had packaging that we just couldn't open. It makes me not want to buy a product again,
It
right? Which is
does.
terrible.
Yep,
Which is,
it
and
does.
I think that we should all keep that in mind when we're looking at buying something. Um, I think overall, a lot of people are aware of it, and we're all trying to come to good solutions for that. I know we really keep that in mind. I know our customers keep that in mind. Um, Even in pouches, there's some pouch, because they all have CR zippers. There's some CR zippers that I literally cannot figure out how to open, right? It's if you have to sit there for 5 minutes, you're thinking, well, they really didn't want me to get into this. Um, right? I will say one thing in child resistant that I'm waiting to see happen is right now a lot of CBD product is not in child resistant packaging. I see more ending up in child resistant packaging long term. I could see
Okay.
that happening. But I guess I don't have a very good answer for you.
Well, I just know that a lot of companies are working on it. And one of the things that I wanted to end with here is that there may be some solutions at the upcoming CanPack event, which is in Anaheim, California, co-located with the Westpack event. And this is April 12th through the 14th. That's when the event is in Anaheim, California. And I mention that because this session is part of the SMART event. All about the in-person Anaheim event that we have coming up. And Beth is going to join me with a couple other people on a panel discussion there, which is also going to talk very specifically about sustainability strategies for cannabis packaging. And that is going to be on Tuesday, April 12th, in Anaheim, California, with the rest of the event. And Beth, we could talk for, hours at least about more on packaging for cannabis. Cannabis in general, packaging in general, and then packaging for cannabis. But I do thank you so much for your time and look forward to talking with you, hearing what you have to say a little bit more on the sustainability side at the in-person event. So Beth, thank you so very much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you.